are live, just about.
Okay.
So I guess we will, he said to give it about 30 seconds. La, 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 la.
La, la. Okay, well, it's almost, I think we're about ready.
Welcome, everybody, to our talk today. We are with Creative Exchange, which is just a wonderful platform for interviews and education and technology. We were privileged a few days ago to do our first interview with a bassist extraordinary from India, Mohini Day. And now today we are blessed with talking to the Grammy-nominated singer, composer, artist. She's a visual artist as well. She's just got a lot going on.
Composer.
Yeah. Miss Carmen Lundy. How are you, Carmen?
Hi, how are you? It's really good. Thanks so much for inviting me today. This is the best thing that's happened to me all month.
Well, wait, considering, just to get the live feel, I just wanted to, give you this.
Oh, the roar of the crowd. Oh my God, don't get me started.
Something we've all been missing these past year.
So we'd like to take the opportunity to start the interview by just listing a few things you've done. And because the list is so long, there will not be an interview today. There will be merely a list of your albums and collaborators. No, we have people like you have I had 14 albums out, 15 albums live on it. Is that correct? Under your
15.
name? In addition, with all the other collaborations, you've worked with your brother, Curtis Lundy. I put him first because you got to put Curtis first. Ray Barretto, Bruce Hornsby, your pal from Miami, Mulgrew Miller, Kip Hanrahan, Courtney Pine, Roy Hargrove, Jimmy Cobb, and Ron Carter. That blew me away.
Yeah, Ron Carter.
Randy Brecker, Oscar Castroneves. And then, a lot of young lions have come through your band as well. Robert Glasper, Jameson Ross, just a lovely lady, Patrice Rushen, that we've had an opportunity to meet through you and in other situations a number of times. The late, great Kenny Kirkland, the beautiful Jerry Allen, Terry Lynn Carrington, Regina Carter. There's so many just great situations that you've been part of. We're going to talk about some history. We're going to talk about your work utilizing different kinds of technologies. We can also let people know that for you encompass so many different kind of disciplines. We both really feel like A Time for for Peace from Modern Ancestors is really a masterpiece. You combine so many amazing things. It's within the circle of jazz, but it's also so boldly contemporary. And with all due respect to a lot of the jazz vocalists out there, none of them are making statements that I feel are as bold as the ones that you make. They are really grounded in such a fundamental musicality that anybody listening to this now or in later on when it's rebroadcast on Creative Exchange, you really ought to do yourself a favor and go back through Modern Ancestors, through any of the more recent CDs, Cornor, the Live at the Madrid, which is amazing, and it's an album that we were involved with helping to mix. All the way back to the beginning, there's strands of R&B, blues, avant-garde, Spanish lyrics, deep, deep grooves, and it's just tied together in a really artful way. So we urge people to go check out Modern Ancestors. That's the most recent Grammy-nominated one. There's Ola de Calor, Jazz on TV, which is so great. Meant for Each Other, which is just beautiful. So everybody go check that out. You have done shows around the world, but you were coming out of Miami, and we wanted to talk about and gospel. And so we wanted to start a little bit by just giving a little microcosm of that, and then some of your time in New York. So tell us about your upbringing and your time in Miami, please.
Well, Miami, born and raised, right in smack dab in the 50s, to a huge family. My mother was the oldest of 11, and I'm the oldest of 7. And Curtis comes right after me. We're actually Irish twins, my brother, bassist Curtis. So we grew up in the same house with 9 people in the house, So, and during that time, it's funny how you can have so many siblings, but only 1 or 2 of you are into we do music, and then the others have this whole, it's like, real jobs. I call them real jobs. I shouldn't do that. But so it's interesting how my brother and I don't know what it was, but we we were right alongside each other in the early days. My mother sang beautifully with a group of other voices. Sometimes there were men in the group, sometimes not, but it was always 40 years later, they were still singing together. So I grew up watching my mother rehearse her music with the other singers, and my aunt accompanied on piano. Occasionally there were drums, occasionally there was blues guitar, but it was like this constant throughout my upbringing, all the way up until I think I was graduating high school. This is the music I heard. So I grew up in a Pentecostal Christian environment, which is very fundamental Christianity, particularly in the African American experience during the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, even up to now. So that fundamental association with music was something I took for granted, actually. It was just so much a part of my life. But the one cool thing was there was always a piano wherever I was. My grandmother's house, the beautiful upright piano, you can imagine, what that might look like. My house, we always had a piano from the time I can remember. Around the age of 4 or 5, I started plucking out the songs that my mother was doing, or, I'd sort of like try to harmonize and copy my aunt. So around the age of 6, my mother introduced me to piano lessons, formal piano lessons. And it just so happened that she knew the perfect person who was a classical pianist. My mother did some side work for her, and she was a classical pianist. So when my mother would go to work for this lady, she'd take me with her. And Curtis and I would get lessons. So Curtis would get, her son was a drummer. So Curtis's first instrument was drums, and I was getting the piano. So that was kind of the way my childhood went. And at some point, it became very apparent to me that this was where I had the most fun. You got to remember, I'm the oldest of 7 kids. So by the time the 7th kid came along, my whole thing was come home from school, get everybody ready for school, get back, watch everybody once you get in from school, make sure the homework is done. So I was pretty much indoors, and in between I could just do piano. So that's kind of how I did it. That's how I managed my childhood as the oldest of 7 kids. And the piano lessons were consistent. I think around the time of 11 or 12, I was not really advancing in that whole practicing discipline, like practice. 16th notes looked like, it looked like a foreign language. I mean, I could deal with the half note and the quarter note, but 16th notes and 32nd notes were like, no, I don't know what this means. So around that time, I was, there are all these tiers of choirs in my church. There's a junior choir, there's the Apostolic Singers, and one choir sings on the first Sunday, another choir sings the second Sunday. So I was kind of recruited into this choir, and I did the harmony instead of the melody. So that's where the whole alto, tenor, singing the harmony, supporting lines was the most fun. Opened my ears up. And because I was already here at the piano, understanding how to make chords and triads and things like that, it just seemed a natural thing to sing the middle note, So because of that, I entered the choral program at school. So my whole background is really high school, middle school. My whole thing was choral music, and then chunking out chords for the talent shows for other bands. Somebody would ask me to accompany them for the talent show. And high school, it was the same thing. I was accompanying my friend, we talent show, a couple of songs I figure out how to do on piano, and we do them for the shows. And one year, a pianist came in to play for some other people and to play for the chorus, and he sounded incredible. He was playing jazz piano. I didn't know what that was then, but it was such an amazingly beautiful sound to me at the piano, because I was so trained in the classical, and he was approaching things with notes that I'd never really considered as part of a chord. But those things fascinated me. And through this one guy, Dave Roydstein, he single-handedly handed me my career. Really, he handed me my journey. He just threw me into the trajectory that's been constant for all of my life. And I have him to thank for that generous way with which he introduced me to this beautiful end of the world's sounds of music.
Did he ultimately know that what he had done? Did you ever, were you able to let him know how he'd affected you?
I'm sure that I'm a broken record with him now, but if I haven't, David, thank you again. I mention you all the time. I talk about you because, as you should know, David has been the head of the jazz department at University of Cal Arts here in Southern California for the last 30 years. So, and his musical family, his wife is a flutist. I mean, that whole family history is fascinating and rich in and of itself. We started our careers together in Miami. So right out of high school, going into first year college, David got me this gig singing in the youth jazz band, the youth jazz orchestra. And I was just happy to be, dressing up for a gig. I was just happy about it. And I didn't know it at the time, but the songs I was doing were the songs written by the Brecker Brothers. There was a group called Dreams. I don't know if you remember this, but in the 70s, there was a wonderful band called Dreams, and we just would cover their tunes. And that's how I started as, in front of, a band. And it just kept going. I mean, we ended up at the same university. David, I don't know how this happened, but he was enrolled in the University of Miami Jazz Department. I enrolled in the University of Miami Classical Department. So I entered as a classical voice major. But I was already familiar, thanks to David, with these other things. And of course, that's during the time of James Brown and Aretha Franklin and Dionne Warwick and Joni Mitchell, and all that was happening when we were starting our careers.
Well, let's also state for a second, though, for those that are watching and may not know, I can't think of a more seminal musical place to be than the University of Miami in the mid 70s. Can you speak a little bit to that so that people who are watching can acknowledge what exactly you stepped into the middle of when you went there?
As it turns out, when I start mentioning these names, you're going to be, it's incredible. We were all just, I don't know what it was that this convergence, what was happening in Miami. You got to remember that in the 60s, Miami Beach was huge. It was like a, Jackie Gleason show and a lot of television going on. A lot of the nightclubs and that whole Miami Beach, Collins Avenue, fancy schmancy, was very attractive to New Yorkers in the industry and to people in the television industry. So this whole idea of using Miami as maybe the triangle of those three hubs, industry hubs, and this was really breaking open in the 70s. So what happened was I was doing my classical singing, okay? And because of David, I was making friends with a lot of these guys upstairs in the jazz department. So the jazz department was pretty much upstairs and at the end of the big room where the big band rehearsed, okay? So the jazz department with John Coltrane's album, Love Supreme, plastered on the wall for 5 years without being touched. So that's where it happened. Every Friday in the music system at the University of Miami, you had to do a concert for the school, for the class, every Friday. So there were these jazz concerts, they call them Jazz Forum, every Friday upstairs, and somebody would be hitting. And on the other end of the building were the vocal juries or the other classical juries where I had to sing there too. So I started doing that one and that one. And David and I did a concert where we worked on this thing for 2 weeks, where it was just a piano vocal. And we said, we're going to do this for the jazz department. Well, from that day on, it was a done deal for me. I was kind of teeter-tottering between the both, and the word got around that she's singing in my tune. But Dr. Chelson they're taking her to, the whole chamber singers choral thing. So I was really thoroughly immersed by the first year of school. So what happened was, I don't even know how this happened. I start my second semester and I'm noticing that there's a lot of friendly energy around this thing of me doing non-classical stuff. So they allowed me to change my major to jazz. The University Music Department, classical people allowed me to change my major to jazz, but there was no curriculum. So as
Heresy.
a singer, here I am in class with who turns out to be Pat Metheny, Bobby Watson, Bill Lee. Bill Lee's father was the dean of the music school at that time. You know, Will Lee, I should say Will Lee. Bill Lee's his dad. Okay, Will Lee, Hiram Bullock, Gil Goldstein. Oh my God, Steve Williams. Even Narada Michael Walden came through. Jocko came through. Jocko didn't study at the University of Miami, but he was there all the time. It's insane. Okay, it's insane. All of these incredible players that we were classmates. We were classmates. So what we did was David put a band together, and we worked 6 nights a week, 3 sets, 9 to 1, for an entire year in the same club. And we'd burn out at that club, or something would shift. Somebody would leave because, school's out, school's over for them. Put another person in that chair, bang, another gig that would last for a year somewhere. Sometimes every gig would last at least 3 to 6 months. The same, you would book a room, That's how we started out. So we would go to school all day, and then we play from 9 to 1 every night.
I think people who are listening to, they need to, if they want to immerse themselves, there's a lot of books where you can read about Criterion Studios. You can read about Ira Sullivan, Lion's Share, a lot of those kinds of bands. And you are a part of that legacy. So you graduate, you've already made your chops, and then you go on to, like, out of academic and out of like a searing cauldron of music into an even hotter sun, which is the New York 80s jazz scene.
Ooh,
yeah.
The 80s jazz scene.
There's great documentation and on your website and some of those other things, but if you talk about some of the formative things, you got to meet Jerry Allen, work with Kenny Kirkland, work with all these different people,
Well, I was in New York before Mulgrew got there, before Kenny, before Jerry, actually. So I got to New York in 78, and that was really a result of all of my classmates talking about moving to New York. So you look up and you go, well, what happened to Bobby? Well, what happened to the Pat? Or where's Mark? And they say, oh, they moved to New York, and they live right down the street from each other. It was like this whole idea of this kind of community in Manhattan. So I didn't really know a lot about New York at all. I just didn't know. I didn't know a lot of the music I was learning. I didn't know the history of the theater. I didn't know anything when I got to New York. So I just knew that this is where everybody else was going, and I'm going there too, because this has to do with the talent pool, the best. So I got a little bit of an introduction to the music because there were great jazz clubs in Miami that I played also. So I would hear people that came into Miami. I can name someone like Monty Alexander. I saw Curtis Fuller. I remember Dizzy Gillespie coming through, Ella Fitzgerald coming through. I remember, seeing Joe Williams. These are indelibly important. And not only the headliner, but John Clayton was in the band, or it would be Chuck Silverman in the band, or Frank Gravis was in the band. It was insane. So when we got to New York, you already felt like you had a little lifeline, like a little connection. And also there was the Latin music. Okay, there was that whole salsa, the clave, and everything about the clave was, I was learning about that because the guy that introduced me to Mayra Casales, his name is Oscar Salas, and he was my drummer, but I didn't know he was a conguero. He was just a percussionist. So Oscar introduced me to the whole Latin world. He and Diego Iborra. And Diego Iborra's dad played with Charlie Parker. So all this riches is in Miami, and I'm finding this stuff out. Get to New York, and because I was doing original music, because I was already singing David's tunes and Richard's tunes and everybody else's tunes, when I got to New York, it wasn't a big deal for me to just do new music. But to get the gigs, I had to sing the standards. So I get to New York, and I'm calling, I had this gig. When I got there, I had a gig Friday and Saturday for an entire year in the same club. So I was used to this year-long thing, right? But I thought that was the way things went down in New York. They don't. You get a one-nighter in New York, you're lucky, right? So I got this gig at a club down on 14 East 23rd Street, Park Avenue South. And you can see how I'm saying it. It was like I had to remember all of those things.
Yeah.
But it was a loft on the 4th floor of this building, owned by a guy named Mike Morgenstern, who was a saxophone player and club owner. So he loved the music, but the deal was you had to play with him. You know what I mean? So he was the owner of the club, and you had to play with him, whoever you were. But he had some of the top jazz artists, like iconic at this point. You know, Jackie Bauer. If I started naming all these people that I actually sang with every Friday night and every Saturday night for a year, $50 a night. So everything centered for me around proving to the musicians that they didn't even know that there was going to be a singer on the bandstand. I'd get there and they go, what is she? You know, what are you doing here? But I got to, so it's, oh my God, now Mr. Carmen Lundy, blah, blah, blah. Who's that? What do you want to do? You know, what song you want to play? What key? You know, all of those things would happen. And I started, you know, I had this thing about proving to them that I was more than a singer, that I actually had some understanding of the music. And once that became clearer to these different artists, they would call me for little gigs, and I would start to get those extra little giglets somewhere. And at around that same time, I saw some talent show, and the winner would get an interview with Joe Franklin, which was a late night talk show in New York, Joe Franklin. And you would get an interview with Joe Franklin, the winner, and you would get a New York Times review. So that was how things happened. So I entered this contest at a club called Chili's, Chillies, I think. And I won. And I had a piano player named James Weidman. We go in there and I sing my heart out, and lo and behold, I win. So because of little TV show thing, Joe Franklin had a television show, but he also had a radio program. So I think I went on to the radio program. WOR-TV was the television station. And that was all in my first year of being in New York. So all I did was really, it became kind of the one-nighter, the weekender. I would go wherever. I would do anything for a song. I still do anything for a song. And the New York Times, you mentioned the 80s, when the Brecker Brothers opened 7th Avenue South, but the Village Gate was still thriving, and the Vanguard, of course, and Blue Note opened in the 80s. The famous venue, the Blue Note Jazz Club, opened in the 80s in New York. There were so now it's a little easier to rub elbows with the icons. I could go and hear Sarah, pardon me, or I could go and hear Carmen McRae or Nina Simone or Freddie Hubbard or Thad and Mel Lewis. I mean, it was just dependent on, how they talk about one club down the street from the other, right? You've heard about that in the Greenwich Village, and it's true. So you could leave one, check one set out, and because we all played 3 sets back then, everybody played 3 sets. The whole thing of 2 sets started toward the end of the 80s and early 90s, when we just eliminated that 3rd set from just the general standard practice in the music. But this is pretty much what I did. I just, I tried to do the little auditions. There were a couple of magazines called Show Business and Backstage, and in the back page there would be little listings for auditions for things. I didn't know at the time that had more to do with theater than it did with actual jazz performance. So I did, probably show up at a couple of auditions and go, I guess, I'm kind of digging singing new music. I'm kind of digging singing Cole Porter, So I kind of stayed on my track, and somehow a record date here, a recording there, somebody, Walter Bishop Jr. hiring me. One of the first record dates I did was with Steve Barrios, Lee Smith, Christian McBride's dad, Roger Rosenberg. They had a group called Jasmine, and that was one of my first recordings that actually I heard on the radio, that kind of thing. I did some Latin versions of disco tunes, the We Are Family, we are, no, No nos pararán. You know, ain't no stopping us now in Spanish. I still have the LPs to that stuff. I mean, it's so I was just busy. I was doing everything that I could physically engage in as a musician. Because you know, New York is tough. New York is a rough place to try and get it going.
We're curious as to, we were talking beforehand, and I brought up Porter and Tillman, Time is Love, one of the earliest recordings of yours that you can find on YouTube. And pursuant to that, you had said that that was something you composed in college. When you clearly there are landmarks, let's say, when your mom and your aunt realize, oh my gosh, she can really sing or really carry a tune and or has rhythm. And she's doing it with her brother, and isn't that really cool? And then there are other landmarks. She can play well enough to do this and that. At what point did it spark in you that composition was important because, to your career arc? Because it's one thing to write a song in a composition class. It's another thing to record it and feel like you have a viable voice and something to say, which a lot of singers and a lot of instrumentalists, some of them just never get to that point. I am not a writer. That's what they say. I am not a writer.
That's a great question, JP.
You were a writer.
That's a really wonderful question. I don't think anyone's ever asked me about that. I really am. It's great. Let me see if I can answer the whole idea of the composition. It might have begun with this idea of following in the footsteps of great singers, you know, or trying to aspiring their kind of inspiration to do well like that. So my examples were Sarah, Billie Holiday, all the obvious, right? But I was at that point where I'm now kind of late 20s, early 30s, and I'm thinking, well, if I can go up the block and hear Carmen McRae, or go up the block and hear Sarah Vaughan or Betty Carter, I mean, who am I? And look at what I'm competing with. I'm trying to fit into that. And I realized that perhaps my own song would distinguish me from my version of another famous jazz tune. So it had more to do with how to establish some kind of a unique quality or unique offering inside the genre that people would ask people to listen differently. But most of my work was doing the great songbook. I mean, I taught myself the repertoire and sang with those ladies and those gentlemen sang. And it's a great repertoire. Anybody should, you know, it's a great learning tool. It's a great foundation to know that music. And at the same time, I'm thinking, well, they're not going to hire me. They've got Sarah. They're not going to hire me. I mean, I'm young and I represent the future. But how many versions of that song? How many versions of Summertime do we really need to hear, kind of thing?
Yeah.
So I couldn't see myself summertiming for the rest of my career. It just didn't make sense, particularly when something else was occurring, which maybe by osmosis that I didn't really think about. When Richard and David were writing songs with me in mind, and we were performing them, and even perhaps recording them or touring with them, you know, I'm on tour at the Montreux Jazz Festival singing a song that Richard wrote for Carmen's voice, right? So here I am having to learn and represent other composers' music, and there was no version. It wasn't like I could go to the library or pull up an old Billie Holiday version of an E. E. Cummings tune. So I had to learn and be the person to represent that song for the first time ever. That's a huge undertaking. You know, I'm the voice that's selling this song for the first time. So when I became a little bit more, and all the other players in the group, everybody I worked with, everybody was writing. So we would write these tunes and they would be great tunes. So we would play them, you know, and somebody would go to the gig and throw in one of their own tunes. And I started doing it like that. I started to just kind of sneak in one of my tunes or someone else's tunes. And it felt great. There was a kind of a freedom in it. There was a freedom of possibilities and the opportunity to really express a thought. But I was still like in Stevie Wonder. I mean, who doesn't want to write, you know? Yeah. Stevie Wonder was all the rage in the 70s, all of his compositions. He had another approach to writing that wasn't so much the blanket 2-5-1 chord progression. So there were sus chords, you know, he would, you know, He would have an interesting way with polytonality. He had strong bass lines, very kind of contemporary rhythm. So I was really kind of the swing thing. But Stevie was my generation, you know. So I was digging this whole thing of sticking to the R&B vibe. And you know, infusion was a big deal then with, you know, like Return to Forever and Chick Corea and Stanley Clarke and Airto. So there were all these things that it seemed like I could include all those elements in the original composition. Whereas in the evergreen, the standard, you really kind of respected that stylistic approach, the form for formatting. So I just thought there was a risk there, but it seemed to make sense to me. You know, maybe I'll get a gig if I'm not singing Summertime. Maybe there's something I'll sing that will have people associate with me. That happened all the time in the pop world.
Yeah, exactly. And because when you're doing something, a standard, people want to hear that standard a certain way. They don't want you to stray too much because they want to hear that melody and what they're used to.
Exactly.
So how were the audiences and the other musicians starting to respond to you doing your own music? How did that evolve into you eventually starting to really just do your own band and your own music?
Well, that's also a great question, Liza. Oh my gosh, these are okay. Here's what's curious. A curious thing about that. During the 80s, when Harry Whitaker was my accompanist, I worked with a lot of great accompanists. It's not just me out there by myself, right? So they had concepts and they had experience and background and history. So they had an approach to something, and I was a part of whatever we were approaching. But his approach at the piano was not the approach of the guy I worked with last week. So now you're getting all these different concepts, and you put these people together, and it's just all these things happen because of it. So when we were playing the clubs, when we were out there with Harry Whitaker and Hiram Bullock and Tom Barney, and everybody was hitting hard everywhere you looked, you know, you came to the bandstand like everything tonight is about today, what's happening today, whether you're doing a cover of some standard or whether you're doing something no one's ever heard. There was a very free, open, expecting you to come like that to the music. There was expectation. What? No, we've heard that before. Can you play me something I haven't heard? Give me some vibe that, just the way the guitar. I mean, as I talk to you, I think about the way Hiram Bullock's his sound, well, not just what he played. And I always distinguish that. People have to realize that it's not just the notes you play, but it's the way they sound when you play them too, right? Yep. So I'm just, it was everywhere and anywhere you could be part of either in the audience or on the bandstand and be part of an expression of a sound that was of the time, if you will. We're the generation that comes from the Beatles, but we also come from Miles Davis. We lived both. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? We've lived both in the same time frame. Yeah, but what was cool about New York was that everyone was approaching the music with this openness. There wasn't this specific kind of rigid way of defining ourselves. And I think that's what allowed me to do this original music with a sense of, but when I got to the most disappointing part of this is that when I finally got it together to make, demo tapes, right? Go in the studio, record, Criteria. Well, I did my first demo at Criteria before I moved to New York. So I had a couple original songs in that and a couple of standards on that, right? I get to New York, I'm doing both. I make another demo. You mentioned Time is Love. Andy Potter, he was the drummer with Walter Bishop Jr., who hired me to do those gigs in Harlem and everywhere else, right? So that's how I came to know Andy. So but the thing was, I started, everyone was turning me down. Every time I went to a record label with my new music, 5, 6, 7, whatever, 4 tunes, whatever it was, beautifully produced, great musicians, I was never signed. Never. So that was like, wait a second. How come so-and-so is getting a deal? And how come so-and-so it's okay for so-and-so to do this He's, you know, a guitarist. He's still putting out stuff. Why? He's not covering Wes Montgomery. Why is it okay for, he's getting the deal? What's happening with me? Why is there so much resistance to my recording life being specific to throwback, you know, to the songs made famous by all those great artists I mentioned? And everywhere I turned for years, I got nowhere. So ultimately, this is 1985, smack dab in the middle of the 80s. I've got a repertoire now. I'm working with great people. We're hitting. It's sounding amazing. And I get some money together to do another demo. Like, this is like, okay, demo number 3, number 4, okay? And this time I borrowed enough money to record it with Rudy Van Gelder Studios. And it was, you know, Bobby did the horn arrangement. So I've got people like John Faddis playing first trumpet, you know, and Victor Lewis on drums. And I'm making a great record that ultimately became Good Morning Kiss, my first album, right? So now I've got this awesome demo tape, awesome. And I go straight to the guy that had turned me down twice before because it was at the top record label, Columbia Records. Okay, I'm not going to name any names, but I go there for the 3rd time with this incredible project. And I was led to believe that we had a deal. So it was like, finally, you know, it made sense, you know, finally you keep scratching away at it. Finally, you'll reach your goal. So I thought I had a deal. and I was introduced to my producer, who was to be a great arranger, Ettore Strata and George Calandrelli. Were going to do the project, and the demo tape had paid for itself as far as I was concerned, right? Do you know that never happened? That never materialized. So what I ended up doing was licensing my first album to a label out of Palo Alto, California. I'd never been to California, but this is where the people were interested in my project. And it was an independent record label called Black Hawk Records. And I released my first album, and it ended up for 23 weeks on the Billboard charts, Good Morning Kiss, for 23 weeks consecutively, my first record. And I could not get a gig, you guys. I could not book a gig in New York.
In New York, but could you book it other places?
I could not book a gig anywhere. So no one would hire me after I released Good Morning Kiss. It was a very bizarre thing. I don't know if I was breaking some kind of a, you know, the jazz, and they're like, I think I do a Jobim tune, a Cole Porter tune, The Lamp is Low. It's a beautiful record, and I think 5 of the 8 songs are originals, okay? But that album stayed on the charts. And while it was on the charts, I was so struggling for work that my manager at the time somehow got me on an audition for a Broadway show that was just all the rage then, Duke Ellington's Sophisticated Ladies. So I booked I was on the road with a theater company in Europe while my record was doing well. It made no sense to me, but I was working. I mean, this is what I do. So that was a very disappointing, you know, for all this excitement and incredible music making and creativity and discipline, and for all of that was happening, I just could not get it off the ground. I mean, what I could not get a deal with Verve, Blue Note, Columbia, RCA. So we released Good Morning Kiss in 85, 86, and I didn't make another record until 1990 with another independent label.
So I've got a couple of questions about that. Did you ever get a sense from them? Did anybody ever give you a straight answer as to why they weren't signing you or why they weren't booking you?
No. There was never a reason. I would just hear, oh, they passed, or they passed. That was the thing that I would hear. They passed.
So,
And it wouldn't be, well, why did they pass? What was it? Oh, it was too this or too that or not enough this. Those were never forthcoming. They were never forthcoming with any explanation.
So it's just interesting, in the pop world and in the rock world, you'll play, especially back then, you'd play, your top 40 gigs and you'd play covers. But if you wanted to be signed as an original artist, and that's what they expected you to do, you never did a demo with cover tunes. You might do, just a quick demo to get a gig. But as far as recording, you'd always record originals. That's what they expected. You wouldn't send in rarely a version of a cover song in the pop world. And that's how you would get signed. And, of course, everybody struggled for gigs, but generally, if you got signed, they'd at least put you on the road. Now, what do you think is different in the jazz world?
Well, I think I could be very, very wrong about my opinion of this in terms of not really having my finger on the pulse. It might have had something to do with publishing. I am a composer, and I started my publishing company. Someone said you need to copyright your songs, but you can't publish them until one of your songs is broadcast, right? So once something I wrote was broadcast, which was, I think, Potter and Tillman, when they released Good Morning Kiss and Time Is Love. I did Good Morning Kiss for one of their records, in New York to LA posting. And then I did Time Is Love when they released Space Rapture. So I might got a publishing, it's out there. So I started a publishing company. And during that whole arc of that we're just talking about, I was writing, and when I recorded something, I just, it's my publishing company. So if a company, I'm just guessing, if they saw that I was a writer and owned my own publishing company, they would, in order for them to secure, so there's a two-part thing. A lot of jazz recordings still make their money from the publishing. That's why you see so many remastered. It's the same music, it's the same record, but it's the publishing, okay? And publishing is a dirty word in jazz. In a strange way, it's part of the industry that you don't, they're not going to learn while you're getting your master's degree in in music. Nobody's going to tell you this stuff. Oh, if you have to study that, there's a book called This Business of Music or something that was a required textbook, okay? And there might be a page and a half on publishing in that big book. Okay.
That's why we wrote our book.
We have a page and a half.
Okay. So I have now published, I have over 125, nearly 150 plus published compositions. So record companies are a little threatened by it. And I don't know if I'm right about this, if I'm so off the mark that, or maybe there's a little bit of that might have something to do with it, but
no, that's a
there was
a
time in the 80s. I'm sorry to interrupt you. You just said
no, I said that's a good bet. Absolutely. I hadn't thought of that, but absolutely. People were making their money off of that and they didn't want to give up the share.
Well, let me tell you, when I was shopping, when I was really wanting this Blue Note contract, well, it was around the time that Whitney Houston was singing background with her mother. They had a regular gig uptown, the same place we all played. Art Blakey, me, Robin Ford, and so many others would play this club, McKell's, 97th and Columbus in Manhattan. And when Marcellus was introduced on the bandstand with the Jazz Messengers that night, I saw Whitney Houston, her debut performance on the bandstand in her mother's group that, at this club. And there comes along these, now everybody's doing production deals. You go around, you find this talent, you sign them to a production deal, right? And then they would see a percentage for hooking you up with the record contract. And that was they were called production deals. So the same people that approached Whitney approached me, production contract. So I'm thinking, well, this is the way in, or this is the way you do it. You have someone represent you. Because I was doing it the other way, directly with the company, right? So now I've got a mouthpiece, someone to represent me. And the part of their agreement with me was, in exchange for this production contract, I signed away all of my compositions to them. Now think about that.
Oh.
I was so ready and
Oh.
determined to get a recording contract that I gave my songs to a production company in exchange for them getting me a recording contract. It's, you know, that's what I mean about publishing. You get what I'm saying? So,
Absolutely.
so Whitney gets the deal with Arista. Okay, Whitney gets the great, and look, the rest is history with her. The rest is history. Those same people. So now I do a demo for Blue Note. I've got a production company. I've got all the things lined up. I do a demo. Harren Bullock, Tom Barney, Onaji Allen Gums, JT Lewis, and we do 4 or 5 songs. And here's what happened. Before I signed the production contract, we were in the, you know, the cigars are ready and they're ready to like celebrate. I said, hold on a second, it was 9 o'clock in the morning in the lawyer's office. And I said, so what happens if you don't get me a recording contract? What happens to my songs that I just gave you? And everything got really quiet. And then one of the team of the production company said, oh, well, we'll just give them back to you. We'll just sign them. We'll just have them, the titles transferred back to you. Okay. So I said, okay, so we added that to the contract. We added that in lieu of no record contract, I'd get my songs back. So do you know that I did not get a record deal with Blue Note? I didn't get signed. So now it's like, well, my tune. So I had to do the whole dance with the lawyer and title transfer and go back to ASCAP and, you know, have everything revert to Carmen, you know, C. Lundy Publishing, and I had to do all of that. But I never got the contract. And then I tried again when I got to LA. I tried again with Blue Note when I got to LA and rented SIR because I couldn't find a venue while the head guy was in town, right? And he had canceled a couple of times. So this time was like, okay, make this work. So I rented SIR Studios in Hollywood, and you get, you know, invited people so we'd have a vibe, like a, you know, club vibe, do my concert. And I'll never forget, the head honcho comes to me after the performance and he says, that was with T. Lavitz on piano, by the way. That was Terry Lynn Carrington on drums, Sekou Bunch on bass, and Peter Harris on guitar. So that's what the guys, those were my players on that submit, whatever you call it, audition. So afterwards, he comes back and it says, all right, and he said something about one of the tunes I wrote. He said, did you write that? I said, yeah. He said, nice tune. And that's all I ever heard. They passed. So my entire journey,
Unbelievable.
my entire journey has been from a will to, this is the work. This is my work. This is my calling. This is where I make the contribution to the, you know, to society in a very healthy, there's a contribution, and I have an offering, and I'm determined to fulfill that because that's really what my mission is. And when somebody tells you, oh, well, if you work hard, get an education, you know, you're telling you all these things, right? You know, work hard, get an education, be professional, do all this stuff. You think, okay, the rewards are coming. But those rewards never came, but I've been rewarded in other ways. So I've had a plethora of on-stage experiences that are unforgettable. The live performance, the contribution of the musicians, all of these great people that we talked about that I've shared the music with and had the opportunity to bring along. Some of these kids, I mean, the guy you mentioned, Modern Ancestors, Julius Rodriguez, at the time we made this record was all of 18 years old. If that. It's insane, right? Monster. So I have done what they did for me. You know, the Betty Carters and the Art Blakeys and the Walter Bishop Juniors. They put you on the bandstand. Do you know what I mean? It's not like somehow you're so talented you get to walk up and start it all over again like nobody was before you and all about you and what you do. And you're the one that's going to be the one that changes everything and don't acknowledge anything that comes before. That you're so fierce that, you know, what does that have to do with me? Those kinds of things started to enter the music and start to really kind of chisel away at what I love about the mentor, the apprentice experience in our music, right? I mean, I couldn't do what I do if it wasn't for the examples that were presented before me. So I figure, hey, somebody did it for me. I'm doing it for someone else.
I have a couple of points to bring up before we talk about technology and before we close some of the questions from or people that have written out there. But you're going to have something to say about this too because they're important. A few points. Number one, anybody who's watching this right now, Carmen serves as but one uh, cautionary tale, and I would say anybody who has success in this business has a cautionary tale about how to conduct your business, about how predatory certain aspects can be. At the time that you were coming up, that Liza and I were coming up and learning the business, maybe a little later, um, basically the music business was an elaborate check kiting scheme. And I
Mm.
think part of the reason that you may have had more obstacles, especially as a composer, was because, especially at that time, it was a big extension of Morris Levy and Roulette Records and this elaborate scheme where one successful band paid for a bunch of other bands, and all those bands were write-offs, and the record companies didn't care. And if you want to see exactly what that was, there's some great books. One in particular is called Stiffed about MCA Records. There are a number of others that will elaborate on the environment in which Carmen was trying to work the business side. So that's one thing to learn. Check out that book, and you'll see a lot of the same examples of the stuff that she went through. At the same time, I think it is so fascinating and rich and interesting in that we've seen over the last kind of 10, 15, 20 years, the not just the ascendance of Spotify and going through iTunes, we're going to get to that, but the ascendance of the single artist as opposed to the group, because it's so hard to maintain a group and relations and all that. I mean, think of the Yellow Jackets, an album that a group that I love that have been through
Love
many
it.
incarnations of personnel, and you could extend that to Weather Report and Joe Zawinul and certainly Miles. And the thing is, okay, if you think of a generally, especially like a pop band, the idea is everybody gang tackle the pop item or what we're doing, or in the case of a singer songwriter, everybody gang tackle my vision of the way I'd like to hear the music.
Right.
And so what I'd like is for everybody to appreciate the aesthetic that Carmen came through, which is like, okay, I'm playing with Kenny Kirkland this Friday on when this is like mid 80s. I'm playing with this other with Jerry Allen. I'm playing with whoever on Friday. I'm playing with six different pianists, a bunch of different bassists, a bunch of different drummers. And not only do I want my voice, my compositional voice, and my voice to come across, but I am relying on them to improvise in their style to add to what I'm doing so that I have a sense of, well, this person plays it really driving forward. This person plays it a little back. You have to have a tremendous command of the musical language to understand and thrive in an environment like that. It's very challenging. The composer has to be very, very open, to what's going on. And if you want to see, this precedes Carmen by years of, Miles Davis putting together a group and loving what this guy contributed, but not really liking, hey, when I play with Parker, he's kind of messed up. And so it's like you're taking a risk, but some nights it can be amazing and some nights it's incredible. And that aesthetic, I think, has been lost a little bit. It still exists among jazz is the only form where you're really looking for that. Oh, I got this completely different set of musicians. I want to play the same tunes. Let's see what they do. And let's see how I change and make the music grow with it, my contribution of it within that context. It's super important for young musicians to be aware of that. And that just comes down to play with as many people as possible, and be open about the way you're going to approach your music. You embody that. So it's another kind of valuable lesson to learn from some of the things that you have gone through. So we'll fast forward between New York and you moving to Los Angeles. You're recording all these albums. People do need to check out Modern Ancestors because it's so rich with like I said, there's strains of R&B. There are, to me, and you may disagree with this, but the way Casa plays is so contemporary. It's so like you're finding musicians that have a contemporary approach. Andrew Renfro is just monstrous on guitar, just plays beautiful stuff around you. And you're like bubble, it's like a cauldron and you're on top of it and you're just rolling. And it's like music that's in its time and looking forward. And so that is so valuable. So we urge people to go out and check that. And those are a lot of vibes that you experiment with Code Noir and Solamente, and the most recent albums that you did are really so exploratory and within the jazz tradition, but thinking forward. So one of the last things I wanted to ask you, again, before we get to some of these questions that people have written down, is the intersection of the arc of your journey and how it is intersected with technology. And I preface this by saying that you along the way, you went to classical, jazz interested you. And then wow, she knows jazz. You went to New York. This is how this happened. You learned it. So you are very open to autodidactic kind of I'm going to get
throwing
this.
yourself in.
Throwing yourself in.
Yeah.
And musical confidence is part of that too. So how do you view your relationship with technology now, and how have you used that to make your most recent albums, whether it be Logic, computer, or any of those things?
Well, I think it's relationships like ours, and the times when we've been together, or you guys did a beautiful job of mixing the Live at the Madrid, that relationship, the things that spending time with you in the studio that way, and always participating in not only in my recordings, but in my mixing and the post-production of things, right? And everyone's role is that we all have the same idea. We want to make an end result. So the engineer, all of the technical stuff that you can either be interested in or just kind of wait for everything to be done, and you sound great. But I like that process. And writing is a process. The whole composition, as you know, is a process. And you see it through. So I think what happens in the 80s, I would write a tune and go immediately put it on paper, right? Because I didn't, you had a cassette or something, but it wasn't like you were recording and trying it out. And then I think it was or maybe the mid 80s, where I went out and bought a 4-track cassette deck. This way I could work out my parts for the band. I would know what the bassist is doing. I would say, okay, that's where I want this. So it would give me ideas of how to expand the tuners. Maybe Alex Blake plays such an incredible bass line, like Curtis did on The Lamp is Low. And I would want that bass line every time I, did the song, right? So now I've got to I'm working out this idea for the under thing. And I'm working out how that's going to be. So, and I need some kind of an accent over here. So I got this 4-track and started to experiment with multi-track recording, because that's what I was doing when I was doing demos, but I could only afford 4-track. And then, I've worked on that thing. I still have it, a Tascam 4-track, but it won't, it's like, please, it's like that now. So someone told me, I did a session for Japan, for JVC, for Sony. And it was one of those live to 2-track things. Okay. Mm-hmm. So that was the advent of the VHS and the formatting of the ADAT and that whole thing. So live to 8 tracks. So I doubled. So I got into this whole, and I got to LA. I got to LA and heard about this other formatting. So I bought one of those wonderful 8-track. Who makes mine? You know the one I'm talking about, right? Alesis or something. Yes, Alesis.
Yeah.
So then it was like 8 tracks. Whoa. So now I'm frustrated because I was doing with the 4-track. I had one of those cheap Roland drum machines. Okay, to set that up, and very limiting. So I kind of gravitated from this Roland thing to now needing, so there was in between that, there was a QR22, the little handheld sequencer. So I was using all these little devices to get my ideas down. And then I got to the ADAT, and then I met you guys. So now I'm seeing, oh my God, I got Digital Performer, and I hear like this Logic. So Kenny Davis, a great bassist on Modern Ancestors at the time, he was teaching at Princeton. And they had come on to some kind of program where they were getting these Logic, this unupgradable Logic software. So he provided me with this Logic software. I didn't know anything about whatever. You need a controller. I didn't know any of this stuff. So Kevin Tony came over. I went out and bought a keyboard, got the software, hooked it up, and And a guy, I forget his name, came over and gave me like 4 or 5 of these. This is what this means, you know, that sort of thing. And now it's like endless, it's infinite. I can cut and paste or not, which I don't like to do, by the way. And I don't like to, I maybe it's the ADAT period where you couldn't punch in unless you had that other little device and you had to do it. So, and forget cutting and pasting, right? So I decided to stick with that way of recording and just do a full performance and not go, oh, I'll come back and sing the second verse in a week when my voice will be what? Not the same, right? So then I learned it's better to just go ahead in the moment and just do a full performance, because if I did a full performance rather than cut and paste and 8 bars here and 8 bars tomorrow, I found that when I got to the stage, I was still strong because I was doing full performances. So I wasn't waiting for there was no technology whatsoever in that actual live performance. So it trained me to stick to the discipline of just trying to render a true performance each time. But when it came to the supporting sounds, then I had a little more flexibility. I could, I still do this. That's where the guitar, you guys inspired me. You and a woman that I met in Australia named Lika Checato. And she just was singing stand there and sing and play these, great Brazilian stuff. Italian woman, but she was all about her Brazilian stuff. So when the gigs that we did way back, we did a thing for Sonaton or through Elizabeth years ago. And it got me looking at the guitar differently and thinking about the guitar. My earliest bands always had guitar in them, but I couldn't afford it when I got to New York to have that 4th player. That's why there was no guitar. So I began to take a little less money just to be able to fulfill what I was hearing sonically by adding the guitar. And as a result, I started collecting guitars. Anywhere I saw a guitar, I didn't even know what a bent neck on a guitar was, okay? That it was warped or whatever. I didn't know any of this stuff. I was just happy. So with this, I began to write from the guitar, just whatever I heard. And there was a simplicity from the sound of a particular chord from the guitar that it felt like it was popping right out of your chakra, because that's where the guitar sits on the body. It's right here. And there was something so ephemerally, like I'd never really had that kind of relationship to the piano, where the piano sound, is in front, coming back or engulfing you with the grand, but this was different. So that turned everything around. And you know what, finally, it's so strange, but because I didn't know the instrument, because I know nothing, it simplified my approach to writing. So now I found myself almost reverting to keeping melodies simple. What's so special about the writing of a Jobim or the writing of a Nascimento is how those melodies just seem to float out of the guitar. So the guitar became this predominant resource, even though I couldn't play it. It's funny, I'm saying that to you, but I don't have an understanding. It was just kind of accidental, maybe striking 2 strings in a certain position that gave me just the vibe in that one spot that my guitarist was go, oh, I see what she wants. Oh, I get, I get what she wants there. I see what you mean, Carmen. You just want a little bummer, like maybe some rhythmic support and not so much melodic. But that's what it did. It allowed me to have another kind of communication with my players. So then I started using the drums. I used to play drum tracks. I got so sick of that rigid, tempo that programmed the beats that I took a stretched canvas and a mallet for my kick drum. And that gave my tune. It's like I was playing with my tune now and not with this, repetitive controlled rhythm. So those are the ways I was able to incorporate all of these other tracks and try things. So and you know how that is when it's a discipline, you're practicing, you're working, you're trying to figure out what's the best way to go with the tune, and then you give it to a musician. You say, here's what I have in mind. And then you go, and they go, oh my, so then they go, you just want me to do me. Yeah, this is what I have in mind, but yeah, do you. What am I saying? I'm not going to tell you to do it like I would do it. No, do your thing. So that's how the music took on this wonderful, expansive feeling that I love about the end results in our projects, not to mention having great engineers, you know, who are musicians too.
Yeah.
So all of these things have, or the course of time, are just an evolution of a developing way, of developing approach to bringing the music to the stage. It's really all about that. And along the way, you get your technique, you get your recording technique, investing in things that enhance your sound, maybe improving the quality of certain things so that you're getting the kind of state of the art result. You know, one of my biggest influences to this day is Herbie Hancock because of the way his records sound, because of the way the blanket, the way he expands on the basic, you know, harmonic structure or the trio structure or whatever he's doing with all the keyboards, and the way he's developed and been part of how the keyboard sound and synthesizers have developed in the music is because of Herbie's direct, you know, connection and influence with the designers of the software. So I love Herbie. Herbie's one of those players, he and Miles, that gave me the sense that there were no boundaries. There aren't any specific spaces that you play inside and that you can't really, you know, really use the wingspan, really go for the wingspan in the music. And that's what I try to do. That's what I think that way. I don't know if it's engaging me in the audience or not. That, you know, and that's another thing. If I keep thinking, oh God, are they going to like this? Or what do they say? Or what do they think if I do this? And, you know, not to be concerned with that, to be more, concerned with the work and what that vision is, and try to fulfill that vision with the help of some great collaboration. And the audience will come, the audience will feel that. And maybe that's how you stumble on to what they call innovation, or it's just because you're following your instinct. It's because you're, you know, just with your sound.
You can't be trying to chase down what the audience is going to like. You've got to be true to yourself, and that's what the audience responds to. And having been at many of your concerts, they obviously respond very well to what you do. You know, they love you. And it's interesting too with what you're saying on your journey, because I was reading about what you said in Soul to Soul and how you played everything and then you gave it to the musicians like we're talking about and said, okay, now do your own thing. And then it's interesting because your evolution, now you're doing solamente, and I don't know where that was, but then you played everything, and at some point you just went, well, I'm just going to play everything. I'm not going to give it to another musician now. I like what I did. I'm just going to experiment with playing everything, because now you're playing the guitar, you're playing the drums and the bass. And so that evolution where it was just, I like what I'm coming across. I like my simple guitar part. I like the way I'm playing the drums. What, at that point, when did you decide, yeah, I'm just going to do this myself? This is going to be the
Okay, that was the ADAT. Okay, and I was sick of that drum machine. So I swear to God, I went out to a store on Ventura and bought a snare and some sticks. Okay, I was sick of the program drum, so I bought a snare and some sticks, and then I went over to Jersey Jerry's or whatever that place is. You know what I'm talking about? Okay, and I bought a Ludwig 20-inch bass drum. Vaughan.Carmen gave me a hi-hat. Vaughan.Carmen, great drummer, who actually has moved back to we're neighbors now. He's moved back to Los Angeles. So Michael knew I was doing this, and he came to a gig one night and handed me a hi-hat. And I was on the bandstand. You know, the set was over, and Michael walks up and hands me this hi-hat. So my hi-hat is Vaughan.Carmen's hi-hat. The drum set you see behind me is a gift from Marvin Smitty Smith.
Oh,
the ride cymbal, one of the ride cymbals I got in Istanbul. You know, so it's like, how can I build? It was like really kind of like, here's the thing, you got an idea for a tune, right? And you're fishing for all the right drum program. You're looking for the right sample, the right thing, everything. And it just will not play the hit. By the time you go and find the thing that'll play the accent you need, it's like your day is wasted.
Yeah.
So what I did instead was I would just open up a track and play the cymbal or create what would be the drummer playing on the ride cymbal at that part and just open up the track and do that rather than find it in the pre-programmed plugins. So what happened was I finished with the ADAT 8 songs like that. And one of those tunes really you inspired me to how to deal with getting around the song. And it was just the way you have an effortless approach on your bass, just your effortlessness, which is how I just got to know, what would she do? What would JP do on this? Or how, he's got those really fast licks. Forget it, Carmen. That's never gonna happen. So like maybe I got this one of those cute melodic things that JP is so cool with. So I always imagine, what would Terry Lynn do? What would Victor do? What would Curtis play? So that's kind of how I would think about to support. And then I looked up and I had all these songs on the ADAT. So I took them, I bounced them down to a CD in New York with my friends Myra at a Chinese restaurant in New York. Myra, Julie, me, and Elizabeth. And I said, this is what I've been working on. I gave them the headphones, they listen. And then Myra hands them to Julie and she listens. And they both, without even knowing, the other said, Carmen, don't even bother putting, don't even tell the musician about this. Don't even show this to the musician. Just put this record out. And I'm thinking, I will become the laughing stock. Okay, this is, you're not serious. And no serious, no, think about it, Carmen. If you give this to them, it's not going to sound like this. So you should just leave it alone. And then I went back, I said, Elizabeth, should I really put out like a record just myself? So Solamente is the reason for all the others. Solamente, and then came Come Home, and then came Changes, and then came Soul to Soul, and then came Code Noir, and then came, My Answers. But it was really that Solamente thing of, that's the way I practice. I would just record what I was practicing. And then of course the whole, it's not enough to record it. You've got to mix it and sort of figure out what it goes where.
Yeah, absolutely.
What you want to hear. So it wasn't so much my playing as it was a way to get the ideas out without having to rely on programmed anything. I just wanted to do it all live, in live performance. That's what I was trained to. I'm trained in, we're trained in live, taking it to the people.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the coolest thing of all. Recording is also awesome. And especially during COVID, if you have the facility, great. It's been a great way to use your time because we can't go to the stage. But when I get back on that bandstand, it's going to be a glorious day, a glorious moment. I'll probably nervous, like I'll probably be more nervous than I did for my, talent show back in the day. But that's going to be a glorious day. But in the meantime, it keeps me from having the anxiety of, what will my voice be like? Or how am I gonna, get my sound? If I'm working on it all the time, then I don't have that worry. I don't come to the stage with that kind of insecurity.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the discipline of working at your craft on a daily basis. We know what that's like, and it's work, and there is of a huge value in it. It's quite rewarding, and we get to talk about ourselves with you and share the experience with others, and hopefully I answered some of your questions at this point, but it's a wonderful, and thank you both.
You know what? We're going to get to questions. Before we do that, I want to say that there was one question I didn't get to, which you've been so eloquent in talking about all this. We'd love for you to come back in the future. I do want to elaborate on some of these other things, but also discuss you singer, composer, musician, pianist, actress, and a formidable jazz educator. And so we have not gotten to talk about that. And
that's true.
To talk not only about your experiences, but your thoughts on the state of jazz education. I think it's important to disseminate that information and get your thoughts on it. We're already at the 1:15 mark, and I do want to devote some time to that. So would you be able to come up with us at a future date?
Okay, and very quickly, I just want to say that when we talk about these things, it always sounds like we're somehow magically being able to reveal all of this, ourselves, but it really is the people that you don't see too. It's the belief system, people believing in you and supporting you and being there for you and encouraging you. The label at Fraser Productions, for example, I wouldn't have a label like that if it wasn't for the other person who you don't see, Elizabeth Uwe, who's a great producer and has a history to tell in her own right. But it's people like Elizabeth, it's people like, Sephra, who was my longtime manager, people who are in that walk with you. So I just wanted to acknowledge and remind you, artists out there who are aspiring to do things, you really do have to, you're going to need and have to have a support system and people you can trust that believe in you and that you trust them and believe in them. So now back to your question about.
Well, just that are you going to come back?
Education.
We need to talk about jazz education. You can tell a little bit here, but boy, that's a big, we can't cover that in 3 minutes. So.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So it'd be nice if you could come back again and we could talk more about that. I think people would really enjoy that. And
elaborate on some of the other themes you've come up with. But
there were a few questions
pursuant
here.
To the question, what do you have? What did you want to know?
Oh, somebody asked what your favorite place in Europe to play was. Pretty open.
Okay. Well, the one that popped right into my head, strangely enough, I love playing the UK. I absolutely love playing in the UK. Some of the venues include Ronnie Scott's. I wouldn't say that's my favorite place, but I want to thank Pete King for giving me a 2-week run. They call it a fortnight. Okay, in London, I had several of those. I love this venue. One of my first performances was in a place called the Jazz Cafe. Am I saying it right? Yeah, the Jazz Cafe. And it was a discotheque after the show finished. So it was like a spacious venue where there were no tables except for the balcony. And it had a huge staircase that would you'd go from up top and then you would kind of like scale down and there you'd be on the stage. And it would be like a room shoulder to shoulder and everybody standing for an hour and a half. Killing vibe, okay? That was a great venue. I just loved everything about it. I was surprised. It was probably because of Good Morning Kiss, which I didn't know because I was on the road with Sophisticated Ladies. But I was surprised at how familiar they were with my music when I got there. I was really taken aback. They knew my music. I don't experience that when I go into a venue in New York or here in California or Chicago or wherever, where everybody in the room is like, okay, that's the one, that's my tune. So there's something about the UK, they've always been there. And then that extended, interestingly enough, to South Africa, to Cape Town and Johannesburg. So that was something else that I didn't really, that's what's so beautiful about how this music moves and travels with us and with people. So that's my answer, the UK.
Well, actually, somebody asked a similar question about New York.
Oh, favorite place in New York?
Favorite place in New York. Here's the thing with New York. I've never played a concert stage in my entire career. There is one exception that I'm going to qualify, and that's the library. The Schomburg Museum in Harlem has a venue inside, and there's a stage. It's a small theater, and it's the only non-club I've ever performed in as Carmen Lundy. Mm-hmm. And don't ask me how that happened or why. I don't get it, but that's my dream, is to go to a concert stage in New York, and then I'll have an answer for you.
Okay. All right.
Well, there's a couple people here that were saying, we'd love to see you do a live stream here. Many people
say, easy peasy.
Your voice.
Well, the 3-song live stream you did, is there not something available on YouTube that is from?
You know what happened with that? Let me tell you what happened with that. We had a really good sound for that, and we edited. And when they re-edited it, screwed up the sound.
Oh, remember they did it. They shifted. They did the phase shifting.
Something became, it didn't sync up anymore. It was that I wouldn't recommend that.
Okay.
So, but the live performance, live streaming, we are very much on the cutting edge. Talk about technology. We're on the cutting edge of bringing the music to you in another way that I think will speak for this time. And I think we as musicians are still sorting it out and trying to figure out how we're going to really sustain the standard with which we've become accustomed to with live performance and the way you're in the room. Nothing will ever replace that. But I've been really looking at a way to include my musicians in a live stream. I play piano, as you know, but I'm not really comfortable coming to you as a performer at the piano for the full thing. You know, that's not really where I've cultivated and developed my craft. So I have a little bit of, I lack confidence in being able to just sustain myself like that moving forward. So that's probably why you haven't seen a lot of that from me.
Well, I
I've
have
done a
to
few.
say that was great. With the one that you did, you don't give yourself nearly enough credit on piano because you just sound amazing.
Thank you, Lisa.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lisa. So, well, I'm thinking about what's coming next with that. I'm in the middle of fulfilling a grant from Chamber Music America. So I've written a bunch of songs during this COVID. I said I wasn't going to write about COVID, and then COVID kept, being, it was like wasn't going away. So a lot, and then I've lost family members during this time. So a lot of my songs resonate the time we've lived in. So I'm in the throes of scoring that music now, getting it ready to present to the chamber music people so we can move forward with the next plan, which is to record that music. So I have something scheduled in the months ahead that has to do with bringing all the musicians together to make this recording. And I'm not quite clear yet as how we're going to do it.
Are there, the live thing is beginning to spring to life with different bands and so forth. Have there been any discussions on your part of getting back out there in the fall, in the late summer?
Well, I'm open to all of that, and I just learned yesterday that, for example, the Hollywood Bowl is an 18,000 seat venue, but they're only going to sell like 3,500, 4,000 seats just to keep people, So, can you imagine going into a room, we're opening up, but how much are people going to pay just to sit in the room, socially distanced? And how much money are we going to make? And what is it going to sound like when people applaud? That's like, so what I'd like to do, what I'm thinking about is how to get us back in the studio safely, but try to find some way of documenting that performance visually as well as audio, with the audio, but not necessarily in my own home. So it's not clear. These things aren't clear to me yet. I remember being many years ago, I remember seeing Patty Austin in a recording session with, oh God, Dave Sanborn. Oh. And they did a live recording at SIR Studios. Mm-hmm. Okay. And they had an audience. So it was like making a live record, but in a controlled environment.
Sure.
So that's something else that I'm thinking about as perhaps a way around some of our safety concerns.
Well, if you decide to do something, there's people here that would like to hear you do a live stream on this platform. So
thank you.
Consider that.
There's lots of stuff on YouTube in the meantime.
Yes, exactly. Yes, and there'll be links. We'll add links here to, there's already links to Carmen's website, YouTube. You can find her all over. So please.
My Jazz Speaks Art series, the Living the Jazz Live is out there, and the tune American Rainbow was the only tune I've done where everybody was in different places and we synced everything up in memory of Richard Mateen, who I co-wrote the song with. So that's one I would highly suggest everybody check out, because you can look at that 4 or 5 minute video and you can see how we're all sorting out. I mean, imagine asking a musician to not only track, like give you an amazing take, but to videotape themselves doing it in their own environment, So those are the kinds of things you can check that out. American Rainbow is a perfect example of what I've been able to do while we've been in lockdown.
It's so funny that you say that, because we talk about that. For the first 4 months, I think we streamed one live performance every Saturday. And we talked about by the end of that, and we only played for like an hour and a half, but we were so exhausted from the setup and just the, you play into nothing. That's why I got that little applause button. So I feel something coming back. Yeah,
Yes.
it's a lot of work.
Yes.
We've talked about some of the places to go look, but fundamentally, I think it's so interesting to go back and look at your discography. Go to carmenlundy.com and you'll find a lot of information there. You'll see the entire discography. We urge you to listen to all of it, and there's a lot of gems, but Modern Ancestors is a great way to start, and then kind of go backwards or start with the first one and go forwards. A lot of it is available on streaming services and on YouTube. But if you want to go back, I'm talking to the listeners as we wrap it up. If you want to go back through the course of this interview and just pick up a couple of the names of people that she has mentioned, whether the interesting thing is, like, if you're tend to be an older musician and you've worked on stuff like that, you may not know some of the newer names, but younger people go and they explore things, particularly if they're curious about it. So they'll know Mulgrew Miller, and they'll know Miles Davis, and they'll know Jack DeJohnette, and they'll know Jocko, but they'll also know Greg Osby, and they'll know, a lot of more contemporary cats too. So if you want to go back through this interview and check out some of the names in particular, like longtime collaborators, Bobby Watson comes to mind, watching him work with you at the Madrid, and really appreciating, when we were doing the research, just how you guys have come to rely on each other and be enmeshed in each other's life. Steve Turay, very inspiring musician. Patrice Rushen. So, and anyone else you want to mention. There's so many great. If you look back at their history and where intertwined with Carmen's and where they did their own thing, man, there are so many. Robert Glasper. There's so many people to go look. Jameson. The funny thing is, when we book Incendio now, we're seeing Jameson do a lot of things on his own. He's like he was everywhere. He's going to be everywhere again. And so, like I said, they've come through the ranks of your band and contributed and learned, I think, a lot as well. So, there's anyone else that you want to mention that they should look at, like Jerry Allen? You did such a beautiful memorial piece on her, the 2 years after she passed.
As I knew her, yes.
So people should check that out. Oh my gosh, that was really beautiful and really inspiring. So,
Yeah,
so is there anyone else that comes to mind that you'd like people to check out?
Oh wow. Okay. Whoa. If I start doing this, then somewhere I say, why did she say my name? So I don't know.
Well, you had the collaboration with Terry Lynn Carrington.
Well, that was Terry Lynn. Actually, my first Grammy nod was with her project, the Mosaic Project, back in I think it was 2011 or 2013, where she won the Grammy for a Mosaic Project, where one of the songs was Solamente. Actually, she fell in love with one of the songs from Solamente, Show Me a Sign, which ended up on her project and won the Grammy. So that's kind of a cool thing. That's what I mean about when you write when you're doing it and you're living in your moment, in your process. Don't think about where it's going to end up. Don't worry about that. Just, do the work. And when you compile your work, it'll speak for you, so that those of you who are right at the cusp of realizing a lot of your dreams, and you've been doing the work and you still feel like it hasn't quite clicked yet, it will click. And this is for life. Some of us find other things along the way, but for me, the music is my life. It's for life, and I'm going to just keep cranking away at it. And hopefully, when it's all said and done, whatever my statement is will be there for you for many years to come.
Good advice to musicians, absolutely, and to artists in general. You've just got to be in the moment and trust the process.
Yep.
Carmen, thank you so much for opening your heart and your history book and your modern advice for all of us today, and for future people that will be checking that out. It's always magical and a learning experience to speak with you and to listen to you talk about your life, career, and your artistic path. We will discuss education. We will discuss your visual art in a subsequent interview in the next couple of months. So everyone check out Creative Exchange for that upcoming one. You can come back and see this one.
Awesome.
Blessings to all of you. Once again, Carmen, you rock. Thank you so much.
You guys,
Thank you.
this was great. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed talking with you.
Good to talk to you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.